Good morning. I want to run an experiment. I want all of you to imagine right now that you're the mayor of a large global city. And when you get into the office this morning at, say, 8:58 a.m., your chief information officer is there waiting for you. She's not smiling. She hands you a piece of paper. And on that paper it says, send us 100 Bitcoin by 9 o'clock in the morning or your city gets it in the neck. What do? Well, you probably shrug it off. Another day, another threat. Now, when you go into your office at 9 o'clock in the morning, you can't help but notice that your lights are flashing brightly on your telephone. On line 1, it's your police chief saying the dispatch system doesn't seem to be working so well. On line 2, it's your director of health services. She says that patient records are all frozen. And on line 3, it's your air traffic control director who says they can't see any planes on the radar. Now what do? Well, I can guarantee you that you don't talk to any of them because you're on line 4 calling your bank. This isn't science fiction. This is Atlanta in 2018. But it could just as well be Boston or Berlin or Bangkok. You see, this is a reality for hundreds of cities right now around the world. And it's about to get a lot worse. You see, this year, about 70% of all ransomware attacks in the United States took place in municipal governments, that's to say, at the city level. More than 180 emergency dispatch systems were also frozen, and the numbers are growing. And it's not just big cities that are being affected, it's small and medium-sized cities that are also being targeted. We're seeing a major spike in the last 18 months in ransomware and phishing and DDoS attacks and others on cities around the world. Now, some of them are just extracting a few $100s or a few $1,000s, but some are in the order of millions. In just the last 2 years, Atlanta and Baltimore have paid out more than $40 million in ransomware and associated costs. Lloyd's estimates that cities ranging from Paris to New York to London are going to be paying in the billions in the next year. So I want you to think of these digital tools as kind of the quintessential 21st century automatic weapon. Most of these tools are off-the-shelf affairs. They're sourced from the deep web. They're cheap. They're easy to use. They're readily available. And here's a catch. They're running 24/7. Now, the good news is, and there's not a lot of it unfortunately, is that a lot of these attacks haven't been that destructive, at least not yet. That's because the vast majority of them are taking place in what you might describe as dumb cities. You see, with some exceptions, most cities around the world, they're not fully networked or wired. This means that most attacks, to date, are still relatively limited to public infrastructure and some private data. But that's not going to last. You see, most cities are getting smarter. And here's the paradox that all of you know so well. As more and more citizens and devices go digital, the more vulnerable our cities are becoming. And that means cyber criminals and others are going to make a killing off unprotected smart cities. This isn't some remote possibility in the distant future. This is today. The reality is that digital and physical security are massive existential concerns for cities big and small. Automation and connectivity, it means benefits, of course, in terms of prosperity and innovation, but it also means vulnerability. What you see here is a single attack that was already referred to today, Heartbleed, that all of you know was discovered in 2014, but not before it infected over 70% of the internet, snarling up connections and services around the world. Now, unlike conventional crime, cybercrime which concentrates in time and space, cybercrime is decentralized and distributed. It's inherently global. This means that people in one part of the world can affect people in another part of the world outside the jurisdictions of most local police. Making matters worse, as all of you know, the authorship of these crimes are incredibly difficult to discern. It can range from teenage hackers to organized crime groups to rogue states, their operatives, and often some combination of all of them. Now, digital attacks are common not just because there's more of us online, but because cities are soft targets. We see just how pervasive they are when we start connecting the dots. This year in the United States alone, more than 80 cities have been targeted by ransomware. That includes 620 digital extortion attempts, shutting down schools and hospitals and police stations. The FBI believes there were probably thousands, but the reality is we don't really know because cities and insurance companies aren't particularly predisposed to disclosing all of this information. And this is hardly a problem that's restricted to cities in North America. London is currently hit by over 1 million attacks a month, according to recent Freedom of Information requests, more than most countries. Ransomware has jammed up municipal tram systems in Dublin and has affected railway ticketing systems in Stockholm. Similar technologies have been used to shake down and digitally extort public utilities from Hyderabad to Johannesburg. But as all of you know, European cities are especially on the front line. A recent study of Shodan data found that amongst European capital cities, there are 10 million digital systems that are currently exposed. Right now, cybercrime outpaces fraud and bribery and even common crime in most urban centers. But are cities and businesses taking this seriously? Well, no, at least not enough. You see, most cities aren't even aware that they're being attacked. 2/3 of US cities can't even tell you if their IT systems are being infiltrated. And less than 1/4 of all cities have some kind of information officer or cybersecurity officer in North America. So while awareness of the problem is growing, especially in conferences like these, cities are utterly unprepared for what's about to come. Make no mistake, we're in the middle, in fact, we're in the early stages of a techno-war against cities and urban infrastructure. We're exposed because our trading and transportation systems and supply chains are interconnected. These dense physical and digital networks, they increase opportunities, but they also expose us to enormous risks. Take the case of WannaCry, which, as everyone knows, was discovered in 2017 and affected at least 200,000 computers in 150 countries. Now, the conventional wisdom is that WannaCry was probably launched by the Lazarus hacking group, the same group now behind the Ryuk ransomware that's affecting cities around the world. And it's obvious that cities are getting attacked because they're soft targets. Oops. Cities lag far behind the private sector when it comes to patching vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities are a really big deal. Many of the digital systems that are operating and running urban infrastructure are outdated, and cities lack the personnel and the skill sets to be able to patch those systems and upgrade the infrastructure. Why? Well, most of the brightest minds in tech, they're not working for public utilities or cities. They're too busy playing ping pong and eating free food and making 10 times more for the big tech companies and startups around the world. Look, the truth is that digitization, automation, and acceleration, they're a nightmare for cities. The spread of IoT and 5G means that we have innumerable connected devices online, but without security being effectively designed in. Unlike our computers and our phones, most IoT devices, they don't have the necessary code, much less the space to install it to prevent them from being infected. So far, most cyber attacks, as all of you know, have been focused mostly on older computer networks and legacy systems providing routine services. But soon the entire surface area of the city will be open to disruption. Imagine what happens when hackers shut down oil production, electricity grids, transportation systems, and water supplies. Actually, we don't need to imagine this. The future has already arrived to Ukraine. Think of cities like Kiev that have been hammered by phishing and ransomware and kill disk malware since 2015. Tomorrow's attacks won't just be a costly inconvenience. They're going to generate pandemonium and potentially major loss of life. So the reason all of us are here is really to think about how can our governments, and in this case cities, protect themselves from digital infiltration and disruption. Over the last year or so, I've been asking this question from mayors and technologists and hackers around the world. And these 5 strategies at least stand out. And this is the minimum baseline. And a lot of it will be familiar, I suspect, to you. First, cities need to adopt a digital safety mindset. A smart city is a digitally secure city. City leaders need to recognize that the strategies that protected cities in past centuries may not be so appropriate for the current one. Gates, guards, and guns, well, they're powerless against bits and bytes that traverse the world at light speed. So what does this digital security mindset look like? Well, it means a couple things. It means having in place plans, protocols, and personnel before, during, and after cyber attacks occur. It requires using intelligence and data-driven tools to detect and prevent strikes before they start. It means understanding traffic flows and reducing access controls to anticipate and neutralize anomalies. It means reducing attack surfaces and segmenting networks to ensure that a single point of entry doesn't collapse the entire system. A good example of a digital security mindset is Singapore. Singapore set out a cybersecurity master plan in 2013, but it also had a new cybersecurity bill that it launched in 2016. This doesn't mean Singapore and its institutions are immune. Virtually every single organization in that city has been attacked in the last year. But in Singapore, cyber resilience is top of mind. It's at the front of the agenda. It's not an afterthought. And that means that at the very least, Singaporeans are prepared. After all, the only certainty that cities have these days, as more and more residents come online, is that they will be infected. Second, city executives need to assume a leadership role in digital safety and security. Just like mayors are coming out in defense of climate action and other big issues, we need our mayors to become champions, superheroes, if you will, of digital security. This is incredibly important. Most technology experts around the world, they're convinced that their mayors and city executives just don't take cybersecurity seriously enough. This is not about investing in hardware and software alone, although that's incredibly important. Mayors need to adopt a comprehensive all-of-city approach to digital security that's aligned with their smart city strategies. This means making and enforcing rules and regulations and procedures to prepare and respond to digital threats as and when they occur. It means ensuring against cyber risks and preparing protocols for what to do when the attacks happen, as they inevitably will. One city that's really getting this right now is The Hague, which developed a cybersecurity delta that brings together and coordinates more than 200 organizations across the public and private and nonprofit sectors. And we're seeing these kinds of clusters emerging across Europe and around the world. Third, city authorities need to recruit the right personnel to adapt to fast-changing challenges. This means attracting and retaining the right talent, including coders, engineers, and yes, white hat hackers. This isn't so far-fetched. Cities like Memphis just put out an RFP, a request for proposals, for security penetration tests this year. Memphis is recruiting ethical hackers to test for vulnerabilities across its computer networks and its digital assets. Now, this isn't easy, right, for cities that are saddled with shrinking budgets and ballooning deficits, as many cities are around the world. But recruiting or outsourcing capable information security officers is absolutely critical. And so is providing routine training and education, not just for your city staff, but all of your providers and your subcontractors. Because, as was just mentioned earlier, as all of you already know, most cyber breaches come down to the simplest human error and breach and mistakes. In the end, it's basic patches, software upgrades, up-to-date firewalls, frequent backups, multi-factor authentication that can make all the difference. Fourth, the best defense is offense. Of course, better detection, awareness, and education are all key and part of the front line of attack. And properly resourced police and intelligence and officials who can prevent, apprehend, and disrupt cybercrime is essential. But another way to go about being more offensive is to crowdsource and incubate solutions both locally and globally. Cities have the power to speed this up by making data publicly available. In North America and across Europe, hundreds of cities, as all of you know, have open data portals. When cities open up their data, when they allowed residents and researchers and the private sector to start using it to help build apps and platforms, they can improve digital safety and security. Cities and businesses can very deliberately accelerate this innovation by hosting everything from hacking competitions to incentive competitions. Some cities are even setting up bug bounties to fight back, which means that teenage programmers from Buenos Aires to Warsaw are making thousands, in some cases millions, to take out viruses. There's an obvious win-win here for cities. Building innovation ecosystems can foster both local capacity, but it can also reduce reliance on outside vendors. Now, fifth and finally, cities need to start a conversation about the minimum global and national standards needed to improve digital security. And Cybersec is obviously a critical venue for making that happen. They can't wait for nation states to take the lead. And they can't rely on businesses alone to save them. In our increasingly wired world, we have to expect the unexpected. City infrastructure is vulnerable to digital attacks, but so are our homes, our appliances, and even our children's toys. Cities need to start advocating for digital rules of the road. Think about how cities have speed limits, parking zones, recycling areas, and penalties to enforce them. We need to start thinking about similar types of governance in cyberspace. And to do this effectively, cities and citizens need to have a minimum level of digital hygiene and digital literacy. Take the case of California, which this year passed cybersecurity legislation. California now requires that all devices sold in the state have reasonable security features that prevent unauthorized access, modification, and information disclosure. Now, similar types of legislation regulations have already been rolled out in Europe, and none of this would happen without a public and private sector that recognizes the basic values of these limited types of interventions and regulatory efforts. National and city governments absolutely need to learn from each other, share experiences, and set out norms now and not tomorrow. I'm really sorry for all the doom and gloom, but I do want to leave you with a little bit of hope. The dizzying spread and lowered cost of new technology means that newer and faster growing emerging market cities, including here in Europe, have real opportunities. They have an opportunity to leapfrog legacy systems and adopt newer, more efficient, and safer options. If they make the right decisions, these cities can avoid making the mistakes of their predecessors and counterparts. These cities can build digital security and design it in from the beginning and throughout the planning process rather than at the end. That may mean investing in software design networks that track aberrant activity. It could mean developing MCERTs, municipal, computer, emergency response teams to monitor threats and coordinate responses. Whatever choices cities make, action now is more urgent than ever because we're facing a new world where 100 billion hackable, unupgradable, unpatchable devices are about to be added to the global grid. And once that happens, we're going to have few options to go back and fix it. Thank you very much.